Okay, you're live.
Good morning. I'm Vice Mayor Shanika Smith and the Chair of the Public Safety Committee. I'd like to welcome you all to our June 22nd meeting. All council members and staff are participating virtually. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We are streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone by dialing 855-925-2801 and entering the code 9477. For today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call in and comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801, meeting code 9477. Your phone will be muted and you will hear the meeting live. At this point, callers will hear. For more options, press star. Star 3 will allow the callers to continue to listen live and join the speaker queue. As stated on the agenda, public comment will now be heard at the beginning and end of the public safety meeting. Callers may comment only once during the general public comment sessions. During the beginning and the end of public comment period, you can comment once but not both times. We will take public comment for 30 minutes. During each of these comment periods, callers have 3 minutes. We will be taking public comment after I introduce staff and council members. If you are watching this meeting through our live stream while you are listening to the meeting by phone, please be sure to turn down the volume on your device before speaking. I'll go through now and introduce the council members and staff who are participating with us virtually. Just give a quick hello. Councilwoman Kilgore. Hello. Councilwoman Roney.
Hello.
Councilwoman Campbell. City Manager Campbell.
Hello.
Deputy City Attorney John Maddox.
Hello, everyone.
Police Chief David Zach.
Hello.
Fire Chief Scott Burnett.
Good morning.
All right. We will now start the agenda with public comment. Staff, do we have anyone in the speaker queue?
Give me 1 second. It looks like someone might be trying to get in.
Okay, we'll wait.
Yes, we have one caller. I'll bring them in now.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Hello.
Good morning, yes. This is Jensen Gelfond. I live in West Asheville and just wanted to talk about the summer 2020 protests around the death of George Floyd and what happened there. And specifically, the use of less lethal weapons, what are considered less lethal weapons, such as tear gas. First time that Asheville police have done that. And, what we should be thinking about how we want our police force to protect us and whether we want our police force to be continuing to use those kinds of tactics. It was on the Jeff Bone Bridge that the Asheville Police Department decided to initiate the use of tear gas and other mass terrorizing crowd control tactics. I did have a chance to read the entirety of the after action report and to understand exactly what happened from the perspective of the police. And when it comes to the Jeff Bone Bridge, the police already stopped traffic and there was no direct threat to human life. Protesters were getting closer to police, but it's interesting that that's what started this use of chemical munitions. And it's also interesting to note that there was intelligence coming into the police headquarters that showed that in other cities, when tear gas is used on protesters, it increases the violence of the following events. And indeed, that's what happened here in Asheville. There were no violent protests or looting or arson prior to the use of chemical munitions. But after the use of chemical munitions on the Jeff Bone Bridge, things were really inflamed. And, I do look at the use of tear gas as something that increased the temperature of the confrontation. And I do not think that it helped. Also, after the first gassing, in the following days, the police used tear gas canisters by their own admonition against people who were not behaving violently. They used it to on people who were peacefully protesting or folks who were simply staying out past curfew. By the report's own admission, the police used it to try and disperse folks who decided to not obey the curfew and to try and chase folks who were running through parking garages. Is this really how we want to be using tear gas? Is this even something we want to be using at all? Is it helping our town at all? Or is it only causing additional harm and trauma to those people who
Caller, you're at 3 minutes.
So let's reimagine public safety and think of a different way.
That was our only caller.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the approval of the minutes. Can I get a motion and second to approve the minutes?
This is Kim, motion.
Sandra, second.
Okay, we'll have a roll call vote to approve the motion. Say aye if you wish to approve the minutes. Councilwoman Kilgore,
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney,
Aye.
and myself, aye. The minutes have been approved. Our next item is a resolution to apply for and accept the Firefighters Assistance Grant. Chief Scott Burnett will present this item.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Good morning, members of the committee. Annually, FEMA administers an Assistance to Firefighters Grant program. We have applied for these grants annually for many years. This year, we would like to apply again, and what we would like to apply for are air compressors that fill the self-contained breathing apparatus that our firefighters wear into fires, and also our scuba bottles that our firefighters wear in dive operations. This one-time grant is a 10% matching grant. We anticipate these air compressors to cost around $150,000 total. So the city of Asheville match would be around $13,000. So we are requesting the committee to support moving this item to the full council to get approval for Ms. Campbell to apply for, and if awarded, to accept the grant funds from FEMA for the Assistance to Firefighters Grant. Be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the committee?
No, I can motion to approve.
All right.
I'd like to second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the resolution to apply for and accept the Firefighters Assistance Grant. I'll do a roll call vote to approve. Councilwoman Kilgore,
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney,
Aye.
and myself. Motion carries. Next, we have yes? Okay.
I'm just saying thank you. Sorry.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Next, we'll have an update from the Asheville Police Department. Chief David Zach is here to present.
Morning, Vice Mayor, members of council, and city staff. I'd like to introduce, as I always have with me, Deputy Chiefs Baumstark and Deputy Chief Yelton are here joining me this morning. What I've been asked to prepare is a presentation that kind of gives an overall crime picture in our city and kind of how that picture has changed over the last 5 to 10 years. So next, please. The key takeaways that, we want to share is that over the past 10 years, Asheville has experienced an increase in violent crime, which is on trend with really other metropolitan cities in North Carolina like Raleigh, Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and Greenville. APD continues to work with other city departments and our community partners to take proactive steps to reduce crime and reimagine the role of APD, and that despite our well-documented staffing shortage, APD is still aggressively working and developing strategies to address violent crime and other types of violent crime. Next, please. What this particular graph shows is kind of what's unique and consistent with what's happening in Asheville, but also kind of gives you a kind of an overview of what's been happening in North Carolina, which is kind of a unique situation where you can see over the past 10 years, crime has kind of risen and fallen in our city and in our state, consistent with what the national picture looks like. But you can see as you move towards 2019, while crime, particularly violent crime, across the country has decreased, you can see in 2018 and 2019 in North Carolina, that number is rising. So when you look over the 10-year period, what was a consistent state and national levels and rates of violent crime were consistent with one another. For whatever reason, and I think we've got to do a deeper dive into this statewide, is North Carolina in particular is over the last 2 years gone up where the rest of the country has gone down. Next, please. Here's just our overall crime in the city going back to 2011. You can see some rises and falls, but pretty much from 2014 on, we've seen kind of this steady increase in, this is overall crime, not just violent crime, with a big peak there in 2019. And then in 2020, we did see a slight drop off, still higher than 2018, but again, not as bad as 2019. And again, this is overall crime. So, what we're looking at is, okay, what drove crime down in 2020? And in the next slide, you'll see really our drop in crime was more attributed to the fact that property crime went down. So these are your burglaries, your larcenies for motor vehicles, motor vehicle theft, arson, crimes of that nature took a drop in 2020. So the factors there, obviously there's a COVID effect there. Businesses were closed down. People were home, quite frankly. So, making burglary and incidents such as that in automobile theft less of a target. So really our drop in 2020 for overall crime was most likely, in fact, definitely a reduction in property crime. Next slide. So unfortunately, violent crime in 2020 went up. And as you can see, it's been a pretty steady rise, with the exception of a little blip there in 2015. Violent crime has continued to rise rather significantly over the last 10 years. If you go back to 2011 to today, or at least till 2020, we've experienced almost a 45% increase in violent crime. And we're talking about violent crime. This is our Part 1 offenses, which include murder, rape, robbery, and aggravated assault. And I can tell you, the biggest numbers or the biggest jumps percentage-wise are in the category of aggravated assaults. Next, please. Always a concern is homicides. These are clearly our most violent offenses. So I guess, you don't want to say it's good news, but certainly with what other major cities across the country are experiencing from 2019 to 2020, major increases in homicide and murder. So Major city chiefs found that homicides rose by more than 32% in 66 major cities from 2019 to 2020. We did not experience that, fortunately. In 2020, we did have a slight rise in homicide. We had 10 people killed in Asheville. And so far this year, and unfortunately, that yesterday that number was 4, and overnight we did have another murder and an arrest was made in that case. So we're, pretty much on pace for where we were last year, unfortunately. But again, we have not experienced that major spike that other American cities have. Just to kind of show you our effectiveness in resolving these crimes and bringing people to justice, when you're talking about homicide clearance rates, the national average, according to the FBI, is just over 61% clearance rate. And here in Asheville, you can see from 2019, 2020, and now in 2021, we are having success in bringing those perpetrators to justice. So our clearance rate on these homicides is on par with the national average, and sometimes even ahead of it. As you can see, we're doing very well clearing these crimes in 2021. Next, please. Gun violence. Obviously, this is an area where we've tried to be very, very aggressive despite staffing shortages. So far this year, we have seen a slight reduction. This time last year, we'd had 21 people in the city shot, including last night's victim. That number is 18. So we've seen a very slight drop. I don't know if that's statistically significant to say we're making a huge impact, but the number is slightly lower. Where we've done very, very well this year is seizing guns. And despite, again, massive staff shortage, we're still being very, very aggressive in removing guns from our streets. Since January of this year, we've seized 114 weapons. All of last year was 200. And again, we had a much larger staff in 2020 than we do today. So we're being very aggressive, trying to take guns out of the hands of violent offenders. And one of the reasons we've been very successful with that is we are really doing a much more coordinated effort with our federal, state, and local partners in working and addressing the gun violence that's occurring here in our city. Next, please. Gun discharges and the calls that we go on, these are high priority calls. And again, you can see from 2017 to 2020, we've seen a significant increase, not only in the number of gun discharge that we're sending our officers to, but also, kind of a rise in the number of people shot. Last year, we had 45 people shot in our city. 2019, it was 38. Which was down a little bit from 2018. But again, we seem to be pretty close to seeing this trend continue of large numbers of people being shot, but also the gun discharge calls continue to be a major, major concern where, and again, those are calls of shots fired. Next, please. Kind of our traffic enforcement. This kind of gives you a picture of where we're at with our traffic stops. And you can see 2020 was a major, major decrease in the number of traffic stops that we're conducting. A lot of that, again, I think we can attribute to the COVID effect, as we were not doing as much proactive work. Obviously, we did not want to spread infection or risk the possibility of our staff becoming infected and then losing a large number of staff. So our proactive efforts really went down in 2020. And again, that was mostly attributed to COVID. However, you can see 2021, those numbers have taken another serious drop to date. And I think they'll be far below the 2020 numbers. And that, again, is twofold. Clearly, the staffing shortage affects a lot of that, but also to our focus on addressing violent crime and some of our proactive traffic enforcement has suffered as a result of both. Next, please. Citations, again, same thing. You can see, since 2016, citations went down significantly. The big rise in 2019, of course, this predates me, but I've been informed by staff in 2019, because of the pedestrians being struck and significant rises in injury and property damage accidents, that there was a big proactive effort to be very proactive in very enforcement-heavy citations to kind of curb those issues that we were experiencing. So again, a huge enforcement effort that took place in 2019. But again, now we get to 2020 and COVID, and now 2021, still a combination of COVID and traffic or in staffing shortage, where in 6 months, we've only written roughly 700 citations. That's an extremely low number of traffic citations being issued. But again, the COVID factor and also clearly the staffing shortage. And again, just refocusing our efforts on violent crime. And again, traffic enforcement has suffered as a result. Next. When you're looking at those 700 citations and what we're actually writing for, you can see over half of these are moving violations. The next category, major category, would be regulatory violations, and that would be unregistered motor vehicles, uninspected vehicles, and vehicles that are not insured. But again, the vast majority of tickets that we write and citations that we issue are for those moving safety violations. So with that, any questions?
Yes, Chief Zach, I'd like to ask a question. I was noticing that during the period of 2019, you had a higher, basically, increase in citations and increase in violations. And I'm just wondering what caused that big increase during 2019 as opposed to the years previous and the years after? Was there some kind of law in effect, or was there some kind of program in effect to increase that kind of activity?
Absolutely. And I think, again, that predated me, but that's why I bring my deputy chiefs along who've been around a little bit longer. So I think Deputy Chief Yelton can explain what the enforcement effort looked like in 2019.
Sure. Thanks, Ms. Kilgore. It's a great question. The short answer is the reason for that increase in 2019 is because of me. In January of 2019, I took over as commander of the patrol division. Prior to that, I had been a prior commander of the traffic safety unit in one of my previous assignments. And throughout the from the late 2000s through the mid 2010s, we had routinely seen Asheville amongst the highest levels of traffic fatalities and traffic injuries anywhere across the state. So I'm a big believer in the efficacy of traffic enforcement. The key to reducing your traffic deaths is to change driver behavior. I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that driver behavior in the city of Asheville is oftentimes very poor. And then we were seeing the results of that in our traffic fatality and injury numbers. So when I took over command of the patrol division, I directed not only my traffic safety unit, but the rest of the patrol division to go out and spend some of their discretionary time conducting traffic enforcement in areas where we had high levels of traffic complaints and crashes.
Okay, but it still looks like an exorbitant amount of differences. And so what we actually did now is we sort of not enforcing it to that degree now. Is that it?
Correct, because with the staffing reductions we've had, we simply don't have the discretionary time available to our officers and the number of officers available to go out and address the speed and violations that we have across the city to the level that we did previously.
So are you planning on, once you are fully staffed, are you planning on going back to that type of activity?
It would absolutely be my intention to go back to, again, addressing speed and driver behavior complaints throughout the city, yes.
I think a lot of that, I mean, a lot of traffic enforcement effort also is going to center around crash data.
Yeah.
And again, if we start seeing, I mean, we always get complaints or requests for additional enforcement in certain neighborhoods, especially where there's a lot of children and so forth. So we'll do some targeted enforcement in those areas. But again, you know, our enforcement effort is really going to be dictated by crash reports and where we're seeing large numbers of accidents. And as the deputy chief said, you know, Asheville led all of North Carolina in traffic fatalities prior to 2019. So if we start to see those numbers creep back up and we want them to drive them down, enforcement will be part of the strategy. So we really have to, you know, it's just doing the math, following the numbers, and coming up with a strategy. I believe we also, in 2019, there was a DWI task force that we were very aggressive in. And we're no longer participating in that. I think did some of the grant money on that drop as well.
Correct.
So, you know, again, it depends what sort of grants are available. And again, if you're going to target DWI and that sort of enforcement, you know, you're going to grab more offenders. So it's really just like any other crime. It's following the data and trying to come up with a solution. And for law enforcement, you know, that's what we do. But again, we always evaluate strategy and see what's best. And a lot of that would be public information, advising the public on better habits. But then again, if the tool at the end of the day, none of that works, well, then we go to enforcement.
And thank you very much. And one other question I'd like to ask you is, I noticed that you were saying that you're seizing, I think it's you've seized 114 weapons or whatever. But I'm just wondering, how many of those weapons are unregistered or whatever? And also, I'd like to know, when you do seize those weapons, do you actually research where those weapons came from? Do we have any idea as to the source of where a lot of those weapons are coming in illegally or whatever that you could share with us?
Okay, that number of 114, all of those weapons were seized as evidence in the commission of crime. So most of those guns, I don't have the exact numbers for how many were obtained legally and illegally. Some were definitely possessed illegally, there's no question. And those weapons, we do run those through ATF to see if they are connected to other crimes. And what we have found is, yes, many of the weapons that we're seizing as evidence have been used in other crimes. And then in different investigations, either, you know, some are revived by that information that may have been cases that have gone cold, but it also leads us to the connection of other crimes. So all of those weapons are processed and forwarded to ATF, again, to see if additional cases can be built. And we've had definite success there.
And the only reason I asked that is because this is something I had heard. I don't have any, definite information on it, that guns were being dropped off in some of the areas, some of the housing areas and things like that, that they would just find bags of guns or things, being dropped in the communities. And that's what I was really concerned about. Things.
Yes, and we do get recoveries that way. Absolutely.
Excuse me?
We do recover weapons that way. And every weapon that we take in is processed and run and ballistic tests performed on to see if there is a connection to other crime.
No, not to other crimes. I'm not talking about crimes. I'm actually talking about maybe outside sources bringing guns into those communities, making them more or less readily available. That's what I'm trying to get at, because that was one of the concerns of one of my clients that reached out to me, that he was concerned about the weapons that we're seeing in the community and where they're coming from. So I'm just wondering about checking the source. If somebody kind of way to, to trace those guns back to a source that is not connected with the community, but being brought in or something.
Yeah, I'd have to do a little bit deeper dive into that to see how frequent we've recovered weapons in that manner. I'd have to do a little bit deeper dive into that. But yes, it does occur.
Thank
without
you.
question.
This is Kim. Thank you for those questions, Sandra. Can we go back to slide, I think it's 16 or 17, where you have the traffic stops for the past 5 years? I wonder if there's a way for us to analyze this and look at it with comparison to traffic accidents. So I know that we rank very high in accidents for pedestrians and cyclists and all modes of transportation. But it would help if we would look at this with a population and also if there's an impact on accidents, I think. Is it possible to go back and look at that together?
I mean, again, most of our enforcement action is data-driven to see where I think the accidents that you're describing that we are in those areas where those type of accidents are more frequent. So when we start to see that, yeah, we will shift an enforcement effort into that particular area. But again, right now, it becomes a staffing issue. And between following the data and then listening to requests from the public who are seeing, speeding vehicles in their neighborhood, and we get those concerns all the time, it does become a resource issue at some point. But again, our approach is not necessarily just to be out there randomly enforcing. We want to make sure that we're doing our heaviest enforcement in the areas where we're seeing the most problems and also hearing the most complaints. So we try to do a data-driven approach on all of this.
Ms. Roney, was your question more or less to have comparative data?
Yes, please. So
Okay. Yes,
if we have comparative data between 2016 and today,
yes.
so where we have enforcement and where we have accidents and how they might fit
Got
hand in hand. The reason is because we do have limited resources at this time. I'm curious how our maybe benchmark cities are using automatic enforcement, something like cameras at intersections where we have a high number of traffic incidents, that we might be able to see if there are some other resources that we could use.
Yeah, and I think later on in the presentation, the chief is going to talk about moving more into that arena related to traffic enforcement.
Yeah, and there is, the one problem, like it's like how far back do you go? Because we've also seen changes in population, the layout of the city, and of course, traffic congestion and how that all gets affected. So sometimes, going back to 2016, we'd almost have to look at what factors existed back then as well. So yeah, it's tough to do comparative data sometimes because the conditions on the ground do change. So and again, we've got an anomaly in 2020 included in that data, and we've got an anomaly in 2021. And of course, we had an anomaly in 2019 when we did, an extensive amount of enforcement. So comparative data is tough because sometimes changes do occur that are affecting these outcomes. And again, if all of a sudden a certain area of town has become, much more developed than it was 5-6 years ago, and much more residents have moved in, now that changes, the traffic flow and congestion. So it can be done, but I don't know always how accurate it'll be depending on how far back we go.
I appreciate that. So I do think when we look at population and then the traffic incidents, when we have like the second highest, I know this is recent, so I'm looking at back at 2019, the second highest bike and pedestrian accident ratio in the state, that's not good for the people who live here, and it's not good for our visitors. It's not good for business. There's so many factors to that, right? But if we looked at population trends with our crash data and then this, and I'm just curious if which neighborhoods too have the most, like a heat map of where the most of these are happening, so that we can review the data collectively and tell more parts of the story than just this part.
And we are putting that data onto our transparency dashboard, and that is accessible now. But usually the dashboard, just because of the information and the flow and that it has to be verified, sometimes some of that information on the transparency dashboard is a month or two behind. But we are trying to make that, again, we want people to have as much information as possible. And we are putting that crash data into the transparency dashboard.
And I know that there's a robust conversation happening citywide about a desire to reduce speed limits because a slower speed limit can reduce in less fatalities when accidents do happen. So that would be another potential anomaly looking to the future if we were to do something like that. But obviously we'd have to have some sort of enforcement. So that's the intention of asking that we have some side-by-side data comparison. So thank you for that consideration.
Absolutely.
Okay, if we could go to 14, please. So oftentimes, and I know that this city council and city manager receive these inquiries all the time in council, is what can our community do to help? We all know, APD is facing, in our city, are facing significant challenges at this time. So again, we're asked all the time, what can we do to help? And last month at Public Safety, we did provide a list of, and I think this got misconstrued and maybe the messaging was slightly off or just not completely understood when we said, hey, there's going to be a series of calls that we're not going to send an officer to take a physical report. What we were really trying to do was to promote our police to citizen online reporting, and not saying we're not going to follow up and investigate these calls, but can you help us in just report certain offenses online for later follow-up? So in some corners that got perceived as, oh my God, they're not, they're not coming to our home when there's an emergency. And of course, the other end of the spectrum was, we're not doing our jobs or so forth. It's not that at all. What we really need to do and hope that our residents assist us with is report online as much as possible. That's going to help us with response time, which is vitally important. So that's really what we were trying to promote. Online reporting has been around in policing and modern policing for quite a while. And the purpose of online reporting is just to free officers up to handle more pressing issues, particularly violent crime, but also to have the ability to address those quality of life issues in neighborhoods. And when we don't, if there's certain offenses that we don't have to send a marked unit out to and tie that officer up, we can have them spending their time improving the safety in our community, but again, addressing a lot of those quality of life issues. We rolled this tool out in May, I believe, of last year, and it was just getting really, really underutilized. So what we wanted to do last month was really promote that tool. Crime prevention, this is everyone's responsibility. And I've got some numbers that I'd like to share on just some crime prevention matters that we can address. Just simply locking your vehicles and locking your homes. In 2020, we had 845 calls of vehicles being stolen just because they were left unlocked. So crime prevention, again, everybody's responsibility. Bikes being left unlocked, bikes being left on porch, hundreds and hundreds of cases where, again, just people not securing their belongings and keeping their valuables out of sight. If we all take crime prevention seriously, we'll reduce crime in our city, but also reduce the burden on the police department and have the ability to investigate those serious crimes. And again, we promoted our anonymous tip line, tip 411, extensively. And this tool has become just one of our greatest assets in addressing particularly violent crime. So we continue to push people to report online, and also if they want to report crime anonymously, to use that tip 411 tip line. Next, please. And again, I'm sorry.
Do you think that these new tools play a role in being able to clear some of the violent crimes in response to gun violence?
Without question. Without question. I can tell you in almost all of the homicides that we've had and many of the shootings, the number of tips that we received shortly thereafter have been pivotal in resolving some of these crimes and bringing people to justice. It's a huge help. It directs our investigation much quicker and has allowed us to be much more effective. So there's no question that the anonymous tip line has been a huge asset to us in solving violent crime, without question. And I think we had a recent case just recently, and this case was in the media, where we had a man who had broken into several West Asheville homes in a 24-hour period. I think he broke into 6 homes in one evening. The second we put out the information and we put out some of the security footage that we were able to capture, the next morning, tip 411 lit up, telling us exactly who that individual was. And an arrest was made, I believe, within 48 hours. We were able to locate that individual. That came exclusively from our tip 411 line, that information. So very, very valuable tool for us. And our citizens are using it. The more they use it, the more that tool is circulated and people become aware of it, the more success we're going to have. Next. And again, the tool's been available since December of 2020. Since rollout, almost 1,100 crime tips have come in. And again, many have led directly to our assistant in charges and arrests being made, especially when it comes to violent crime. So very successful tool. Of course, we continue to work with our partners in the city on how we wish to reimagine public safety here. We have been working very closely with the county and their county community paramedic program to see where we can assist. And we know that there's going to be a big role for law enforcement moving forward with the community paramedic program. So we work very closely with the county on that. We've had a lot of conversations recently with Asheville City Schools discussing the roles and the responsibilities of our school resource officers. The city and the county, we're continuing to work towards a final 9/11 consolidation, which I think will work very well for all of us in combining that effort. And other things that we're looking in, again, because we do have a large amount of accidents in the city, is there are some other resources available as far as crash reporting centers and also civilian crash investigators that we're looking at the possibility of that. So we really are looking into a lot of different things as we attempt to reimagine how we deliver public safety here in the city. Next, please. So again, the work continues. Violent crime is our primary focus. I've gone into the traffic numbers and the enforcement efforts there, how we've kind of seen a significant decrease there. And again, we will just continue to work with our city department heads in our community. Again, how just we rework service in the city. That's all I have.
Thank you. This is Kim. So can we go back to slide 17? Sandra, you had your hand raised? I didn't see that. I'm sorry. Okay. So I'm really glad to see that we're having this conversation about 911 consolidation, the community paramedics. I just toured the 911 facilities and did a 4.5-hour introduction right along with the community paramedics. When we say that we are continuing to work with Buncombe County to learn more, is it possible that we could invite them to do a presentation to this group?
And I would say absolutely. It's hard doing this online because I'm looking at the chair of the committee, Vice Mayor. Absolutely would be more than happy to do that if the chair wants it on the agenda.
No doubt. That'd be good.
And then I had a question about slide 18. So remembering that we have a history of disproportionately stopping Black drivers, do we have data on who's being stopped so that we can review how the outcomes may have changed or been the same?
That information currently is on our transparency dashboard. It does exist. We are putting that information out.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Chief, I have a question concerning the increase in gun violence and how our response to a lot of the gunfire has been successful through different tools. Have you heard of course you've probably heard of it, but do you think we could look into gunfire locators, the type of system that detects, of course you probably know, but the type of system that detects gunfire when it is released, when it is discharged?
Yep, I'm very familiar with that technology. I definitely think it is technology we should consider. It's not inexpensive, but yeah, shot spotter technology of that nature. I'm very, very familiar with it, and it has been proven to reduce gun violence. So I think we have to consider all options, and certainly there's technology out there that could be beneficial, and yeah, definitely. It should be explored.
Just looking how effective it has been in larger cities like Chicago. They saw a dramatic decrease, I guess, for a period of time when they started using certain systems like, I think it's called Shot Spotter or something like that. So I'm just trying to think about how effective it would be in a city of our size, because our city is a lot more contained and smaller. But I think there are a lot of other factors that have to be considered when investigating if this is the best system to respond to our gun violence. But I do think it is worth looking into, and I think it is worth the dollar because, human life we're losing human life at a substantial rate.
Yes.
So just a thought, Chief.
Yep, no. Like I say, I'm very, very familiar with that technology. I've been to a number of demonstrations on it, and I know it's effective.
Yeah, I would love more information on that, and I would invite the committee to do our own line of investigation and call in different cities and city leaders to see, what were some of their decision-making thoughts when either declining the use of it or approving the use of it.
Yes. I think that would be very interesting to actually check that out. And one thing too, I'd like to say is I'd like to go back to the increase in guns in the Black communities. And I was just wondering, when you actually, we don't have to go back to the slide, but I just wanted to talk about the source. And the reason I was asking that is because if we're having an increase of guns being brought to our community, we need to maybe find a way that we can address what is going on and also let the public know what's going on. And the reason I say that is because what is happening, if it's increasing, it's going to continue to increase. And once the community realizes that our community is under attack from outside forces that's bringing guns into the community, so our young men can have accessibility to kill themselves, and I'm just saying kill each other. I think that's something we need to talk about. They need to know that they're pawns in something that they actually don't really have a lot of control over. And that was the reason I was wondering about when you speak with some of the people that you've confiscated the guns from, where are they saying they're coming from? Because I know how expensive it is to purchase a gun or to even have access to a gun, and also to be able to learn how to use it. So where I'd like to know where these young boys saying that they're receiving these guns from and training or whatever. Do you have anything like that you could share with us?
I mean, certainly, whenever we make arrests and so forth, we do try to trace back the source of how the weapon was obtained. Many times these weapons are stolen, and many times they're transferred from individual to individual. Burglaries from homes, things like that. Weapons are obtained, and some, quite frankly, are purchased legally. So it really is all over the board. But again, that's part of our effort here is to work not only with the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office, but with all the surrounding agencies, and also with our district attorney and our federal partners, really trying to get to the source of where the weapons are being obtained. But I mean, just last year, over 20 million new registered owners and firearms sold. So there's a lot of guns out there, and they're being obtained a lot of different ways. And I can't say there's one specific.
Yeah, I understand what's happening nationally, but Asheville to me is a very small fish in that pond, and I think we need to really work on trying to control the source of it. And I think and the reason I say that is because I think you will see an increase in the guns coming into the community. I mean, it's already happening, and I think it's going to get worse. And I think we need to be proactive in addressing that. And also, do you offer compensation for guns? Some type of program like that?
Are we talking gun buyback type program? Is that what you're referring to?
Like compensation for guns. Do you offer any kind of compensation for people turning in?
Buyback program. A buyback.
Excuse me? Hello?
A gun buyback.
Yes. And I was just wondering, is how effective is that? Or how effective has it been?
Traditionally, not very.
That's what I figured. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. What you usually get is a lot of inoperable guns, but also because of the gun shortage, there are certain gun buyback efforts, and then those guns are repurposed back out for sale. So those that are operable.
Yes.
But technically, research shows that very mixed results on gun buybacks is not the most effective method. And like I say, usually the guns that are turned in are inoperable or just in extremely poor condition.
Okay. Yes, I figured it was probably ineffective. That's the reason I was just wondering, Thank you.
I mean, any gun you take off the street is worthwhile, but, if it's going to make a significant impact, that's debatable.
Thank you.
Thank you for the update, Chief. I think that's all for that part of the agenda. Next, we'll move to public comment. Do we have any callers in the speaker queue?
There's no one in the queue.
All right. Any other comments or concerns from the committee? All right, this meeting is adjourned. I'll see you all later on.